Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I am Georgia Christa, TAG's event coordinator, and it's a great pleasure to introduce Timothy Smith and Jonathan Taylor to present us their talk, Losing Streak, the Competition and Architectural Exploration. Timothy and Jonathan are practitioners, educators, and researchers operating in the field of classical and traditional architecture. They established their London-based practice in 2010, and in 2011 at Kingston School of Art, they set up the first classical design course in a RIBA accredited school for over 80 years, and the only one, as far as we know, in an European School of Architecture. Their current projects include a new build art studio and art gallery in Camden, the refurbishment and extension of 2 London houses, a new build, housing in London, Essex and Cambridgeshire. In spring 2021, they were William H. Harrison guest critics in classical architecture at the University of Miami. And they have been visiting scholars of the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. since spring 2022. Last year, they were awarded the Institute of Classical Architecture and Art Arthur Ross Award for Education in New York City, and in 2021, they received a Traditional Architecture Group Achievement Award in recognition of their 10 years of classical design education. After plaudits for their teaching, they were thrilled to receive another TAG Award, this time for one of their buildings in 2022. I would like now to hand over to Jonathan and Timothy, but I have to tell you back that after the session, we will have the question and answers. If you have questions during the talk, please type your questions in the message bar at the bottom of the screen, and after the talk, I will invite you to unmute your microphone and ask your questions directly. Thank you very much. Jonathan and Timothy, please.
Thank you. When TAG first asked us to give a talk, we thought we might do it on the use of architectural precedent, which is a subject dear to our hearts. Unfortunately, our illustrious and tonight absent chairman beat us to it with his recent lecture on the same subject. So we thought instead we'd talk tonight about our experience doing architectural competitions, which incidentally always involve looking at precedent. This slide shows an image or a board from almost every competition we have done in the past 10 years. Obviously, each submission usually involves many more sheets and images, and I've left off some of the framework applications. Of the roughly 25 entries on this page, we've been shortlisted for about 4, won 2, and built none. So you'll observe that the hit rate is not great. And so hence the title of this talk. So given that competitions are physically arduous, almost always non-paying and expensive to do both in terms of staff time and because they displace paid work, why do we do them at all? Well, it's a question we often ask ourselves, especially as it approaches midnight and we find ourselves still in the office with a deadline looming. So except in the case of invited competitions, where there's a higher chance of landing a project, we never enter in the expectation, or even the hope really, of a win. The reason we do competitions is to work through ideas in relation to a type of building we haven't worked on before, and to experience a scale of commission that is usually much larger than we usually deal with. In some ways, you could consider this simply a species of CPD or training, but we find the chance to explore a set of architectural ideas with relative freedom, but directed by a specific architectural brief, immensely valuable. And I should say we enjoy the ideas more than the toil and labor of actually completing the competition. But we do always, or almost always, complete the submission, partly to have a record of the ideas, but also to retain a sort of physical artifact of the whole process. It's also true that the ideas become more interesting and perhaps more architecturally concise when they have to be expressed through the directing lens of the brief and through the structure of the competition submission itself. Reflecting on the projects that we're about to show you, I think we've gathered a reasonable cross-section of the architectural approaches in our entries. We've chosen one more or less vernacular building, 3 in a style we call marginal classicism, which we've talked about a lot before, and 1 in a fairly straightforward classical language. In a way, I think that the competition allows one to find the office's purest architectural expression and response to a given brief. I say this with some trepidation, because you may not like anything we show you very much, but that, of course, is the gamble of the competition. This was a building for the National Trust at Clifton Gardens, and was commissioned as part of a general improvement to the Trust facilities to sort of enable increased visitor numbers. So it provides additional toilets and some cleaning and catering storage. So this is a plan of part of the estate, and our new building is here, some existing buildings here, rather nice boundary wall, some fairly old vernacular buildings here, and a sort of a landscape building. It's kind of a Chinese garden up here. Sorry, a landscape garden with sort of various follies and things in it. So this is a little site model we made, and the building, our building, sits here. And this is one of the existing buildings called the Doll's House. And the building needed to be, our building needed to be approached from two directions, front and back. And we thought, therefore, that it shouldn't have an explicit express front or back. But it also needed to maintain a functional relationship with the Doll's House, which is on the left there, and is one of the follies on the estate. And the 2 buildings look over a picnic area. And this is the Doll's House, which is by an architect called George Devey, who probably some of you have heard of. So it seemed important to us that the building should have a familiar form, which is not alien to the landscape or to the other buildings in the landscape, but it should also not attempt to directly reproduce any of the surrounding buildings, which are all quite individual in character anyway. We're not interested in designing a building which was very obviously different from the existing state buildings, in the sense that it had to have some sort of contemporary language, whatever that means, rectilinear and flat roofed, I suppose. We thought that it should seek a robust continuity with these other buildings. Had this model made in a very red timber, whose name I currently forget. But the form of the building is a sort of familiar hipped roof with a cerulean opening to each end of a central passageway, which gives access from both sides. Wall-head dormers at each end, like the male and female toilets respectively, because here's a very glamorous building. It's essentially two loos, one gents, one ladies, 2 with sort of disabled access, and central kind of passageway through the middle with benches on either side for people to wait, and 2 fountains where people can fill water bottles and dogs can drink from at the base. So there's kind of a nice sort of yin-yang thing going on with the plan. It's a sketch of the loos. It's a view of the sort of central passageway from the outside. And that's what the interior of the passageway might look like. So all the materials were to be clay tiles and bricks, which are found elsewhere on the estate, notably at the old dairy, which is here, rather lovely. And we made a 1:10 model of part of the facade to try out all sorts of different tiling patterns. This is the one we landed on, with a kind of decorative frieze running around at eaves level. So the way the tiles are used on the facade without interruption differs from the traditional way in which these materials are usually used. So the eaves here are clipped without guttering, giving the form an abstract quality, while the grain texture and colour variation mean that the building will sit comfortably and naturally in the existing landscape and against the existing buildings. The eaves were kept as low as possible to make the building seem smaller, and the hipped roof diminishes the volume and the bulk. So we constructed a 1:1 mock-up of half of the building, sort of built out of scaffolding covered with red safety netting, We partially tiled it in order to give everyone, in order to get everyone to agree that it looked okay and that it would sit acceptably in the landscape. And here's a picture from a little further away from the Chinese garden. And here's a picture from even further away, which is symbolic of the project as it slipped from our grasp. It was entered. We submitted a planning application and it was all going swimmingly. And then the estate decided that they needed to construct a strategic review of their buildings. And so, which as far as I know is still ongoing. So the project stopped there. But anyway, here's a collage of a close-up of the facade showing past the Cerulean opening, the tiling treatment, and the niches for the fountains.
Hello, everyone. We were shortlisted to the final four for this competition, run by the Architecture Foundation, for the extension and remodelling of the Institute of Psychoanalysis in London, in Maida Vale. The Institute of Psychoanalysis is an institution of Edwardian beginnings in a building of Edwardian heritage with a facade which is typical of institutional buildings of the period. It has a friendly grandeur with a simple classical grammar composed in brick. We thought the nature of the facade might provide an analogy for the proposals for the interior. It is serious but not unfriendly, with a sense of order disrupted by the playful placing of the chimney and by the circular windows. We sought to bring the friendly order of the facade to the inside of the building. We began by thinking about institutions and institutional buildings. The adjective institutionalized is very often used in a pejorative sense, but the professional institution is almost always an organisation concerned with advancement. Once past the threshold, a physical or professional one, members are considered equal regardless of social status or background. The Victorians, who established many of our most well-known institutions, understood very well the forward-looking and progressive nature of many institutions. We thought that architecture and interiors housing the institution should do so in a way that celebrates the qualities of the organisation, and that the architecture of the building provides the ordered ground against which the activities and rituals of the institution play out. The best examples of these public buildings, from everyday pubs to great museums, exhibit a kind of robust beauty that the character of these spaces may be vibrant or subdued, cosy or grand, as their use demands, but all exhibit a sense of quiet order, a background decorousness, which facilitates the occupation and use of the building. We'd recently seen the Lowry exhibition at Tate Britain and admired this painting of Ancoats Hospital. It's not a beautiful interior, but it is a handsome one. It's bright and airy, ordered by its architecture. There's timber booths at each end and dark door cases. The high-level windows give the room the character of a courtyard or a small town square. Materials such as the terrazzo floors and the burgundy wall tiles and small glazing panes of the booth windows provide grain, texture, and visual interest. Our proposal sought to bring the friendly order of the facade to the inside of the building, which had a complex layout of rooms defined by ad hoc accretions over the decades. It was pretty dismal. Our approach was to propose an interior architecture of screens, bringing a consistent new order which could be applied across the various phases of work which were likely to be required to deal with budgetary constraints. The screens could define volumes of space and serve various practical and presentation purposes, and provide a sense of order through the various phases of work and bring harmony to the different parts of the programme. This is a rather grand quote, but it sums up our approach to reordering the interiors quite nicely. Alberti's screen isolated an earlier phase of the building's life, extracting it from the flow of time and reverting it as an independent object. The few inches of space he left between the core and the shell, between the relic and the reliquary, symbolised the distinction between a building that simply existed, fulfilling its functions, and a new kind of building capable of conferring intentional meaning. With his architectural supplement, Alberti reconfigured his own activity as one of framing and commenting. Instead of trying to mask the earlier life of the building, he enshrined it. So we thought the screens could make a distinction between a building which simply existed and a new kind of building capable of conferring intentional meaning. The existing Sigmund Freud room, there's a sketch of our proposals for that room on the right, which is the main lecture and event space, already had some qualities which are useful to retain, such as split levels giving a sense of drama and festivity, and which could enable the room to be flexible. High-level windows to the exterior, providing a visual connection to the public realm, but with a changing ground level maintaining a certain distance. And the brick vaulting to the ceiling as a decorative attribute which might be thought of as similar to the coffering of a grander architecture. We had a strong image in mind of a full audience leaning over the mezzanine balcony to absorb the ideas of the speaker, as here in Veronese's painting. Events mostly took place in the evening in the Institute of Psychoanalysts, with intense discussion and concentration, but we imagined with a festive atmosphere, perhaps not unlike the wonder and spectacle of an Enlightenment and anatomy demonstration, but revealing the workings of the mind. Depictions of the flagellation of Christ tend to feature highly ordered geometrical interior spaces that frame the events of the pictures, but also provide the props. While the architectural order heightens the mood and gives meaning to the events, we also imagined our screens opening and closing to provide flexibility to the spaces. Their composition is based on simple ionic proportions with tripartite openings at floor level, and niches or internal windows above. Double doors which read as panelling when closed, when open, allow people to flow through from space to space. That's at Clement Danes on the Strand on the right here. The dark wood panelling holds the congregation and contains the earthly realm under the light-filled white and gilded vaults above. We proposed dark tones with the lustre of lacquer and flecks of the grain of fibreboard, poplar wood and quilted felt at the earthly level, and whites and possibly some gilding in the cerebral realm of ideas above. And on the left is an example of this materiality and colouring from an earlier project of ours in a library in Camden. The Institute understandably has immense reverence for Sigmund Freud, who worked surrounded by thousands of objects, photographed here at his desk in Vienna in 1938 by Edmund Engelmann. The Institute itself owns many artworks and artefacts which we thought could be displayed in the armature of our screens, inspired by the Studiolo at Palazzo Ducale in Urbino. We imagined niches at the upper level, housing the busts of psychoanalytical forebears, disembodied heads in the realm of ideas, overlooking proceedings below. Here is our overview for the ground floor. The entrance is here. It's remodelled to be more generous and to communicate the status and seriousness of the institution. The stairs, where's the area? The stairs down to the Sigmund Freud room are widened towards an anteroom defined by screens, through which is the main Sigmund Freud lecture and event space, or through a door behind here to the staircase around the lifts, up to adult consulting rooms and office and seminar spaces, or down to the lower ground floor child and adolescent consulting rooms. New walls are indicated in black, and they take up some of the caretaker's flat for archive space over here. They free up space by the stairs for a waiting room over here. The existing waiting room was in the centre of the plan between all the consulting rooms, which wasn't appropriate acoustically. And the consulting rooms are upgraded with improved acoustic separation between each room. And in the centre, these slightly strange forms, I've lost, here we are toy boxes, like little edicules, little buildings in the central space. We looked to Asplund and his ovular room at the Villa Snellman to create a cosy waiting space, assuming that children might be rather anxious before their consultations. It's near to the consulting rooms, but acoustically separate. It's near to toilets, views of the exterior and planting out here in the light well, and it gives access to the pavement vaults. The brief required lots of storage, which we placed in the centre, as mentioned before, of the plan as freestanding boxes inspired by Soane's model room, so as not completely to divide that quite hermetic internal space. At ground floor, this is the existing plan, we suggested removing some structure along this line to give a squarer space to the Sigmund Freud room. This was the main big move proposed within a actually impossibly tight budget. But it offered the opportunity to lower part of the floor, the ground floor, capitalising on the excavation required for new structural frames for additional toilets and a cloakroom. This is the proposed ground floor layout with the new corridor along here through what was a very long, quite impractical storage spaces to the lowered balcony and new structurings again shown in black. So this is all accessible from a platform lift somewhere abouts. And below there, additional toilets and cloakrooms are under the balcony, and a small kitchen is under the stair landing. The existing sections, and particularly visible in cross-section, the lowered floor. This is an image of that new lecture theatre in use with the balcony up to the left and the further raised ground floor in the distance. And plans of the building in use as seminar rooms. So the screens allow the space to break down into a series of smaller rooms to be used for seminar rooms, reception spaces for to events in neighbouring spaces, or used as private hire to generate income. And this is an image in the daytime of that lecture theatre, closed down as a smaller space, perhaps with other things happening beyond the screens. The shutters on the right, we thought, to the balcony could be glazed to borrow light from the main space, and or be sashes that drop down into the wall below. Should be quite fun. This is the anteroom before an event, after an event, and as a seminar room or a quiet space during the daytime. Hopefully these images convey our idea that the colour and order give an atmosphere of seriousness and quality, weightiness, and a distinct character. It was quite an intricate brief, a very demanding brief in terms of timescale for actual construction, phasing, budget. So we, part of our strategy was to provide several alternatives to the ideal plan. And this was an alternative that didn't require removing so much structure. And it provides a large raked lecture theatre to the rear of the plan. It removes only one structural pier. You can see that here in section and again in model form. And then at the entrance to the building, we made the reception more generous and nicely composed, we gave it an interior architecture to create a memorable impression of a confident and important institution. Sense of exteriority, such as the Reform Club atrium that we showed at the beginning. More sense of height and a connection through these windows to the first floor. It's a proper room rather than leftover space as an entrance. It would easily incorporate nice new signage and lettering, and the widened stairs down towards the Sigmund Freud room. The waiting room is moved upstairs away from the thoroughfare, with the balcony extended to the front facade wall and niches cut into it to avoid the windows, which it would otherwise clash with. And seats around those niches face outwards, which we also thought was nice, as we anticipated lots of visitors wishing for some privacy.
They can face away from each other.
We tried to harmonise the section by using a series of horizontal datums. You can see here in the proposed long section below, and in perspective here, looking back towards the entrance from outside the anteroom, with the first floor opening to the upstairs waiting room straight ahead.
This is the most recent competition that we've entered, I think. Yes, it is. It was an open international design competition for an additional building for the Sarah Hilden Art Museum in Tampere, in Finland. The largest part of the site is currently a car park at the southern end of a public park. So the park is sort of moving off here, and you can see bits of the car park here. And there was an additional part of the competition area just across the road here in this bit. And the city was planning to build a large underground car park elsewhere, but part of the competition brief called for access from that car park with a stair and a lift. So it was a museum and car park access, really. We're inspired by sort of the 19th century buildings, industrial buildings in the area, which are beautiful brick buildings of a type quite common in Scandinavia, and which have been converted into housing and commercial uses. We wanted to design a building with the dignified, weighty presence of these neighbours, but which had the direct and transparent relationship with the public realm that a modern museum would desire, with an open relationship to the public park. Here you can see a selection of views around the site and some of the rather nice buildings that surround it, from these timber framed ones to sort of slightly more industrial and more substantial brick ones. And we started to think about gardens because of the park, really, in which architecture has a strong role to play. The space in this building is mostly architecture, but it is obviously not enclosed by a roof and is clearly a garden of sorts. The trees, fountain and climbing plants create a beautiful balance with the architecture. And this painting also reminded us a little bit of Villa Adriana and the exedra there. And we found this engraving on the right by Piranesi. As you know, an exedra is a semicircular architectural recess and has the peculiar quality of being externally opening and inviting, while also being internally embracing and containing. So its external nature is open and generous, and its internal nature is sheltering and intimate. And we thought these qualities could be useful to us. We thought of designing two of these spaces, one offering a generous welcome from the public realm at the bottom of the page here, and the other embracing the park, but allowing the park to sort of drawing the park into the territory of the museum. We've also always liked the Delian order, a variety of Greek Doric, which has a kind of residual fluting at the top and the base of the shaft, as if the mason began setting it out and gave up or ran out of time. We had in mind industrial architecture like the neighbouring buildings, which have little in terms of embellishment, but and we were also thinking about tuning the architecture to its purpose. It had to be a civic building, but it wasn't a courthouse or a smart club, but it should be a robust space for the presentation of contemporary art. We felt that the language of the building as a whole should be restrained and embellishment minimal. And the Delian gave us the opportunity to subvert the classicism almost literally into itself. And we also thought that we'd like to cast them in concrete. We'll also think at the same time of those sort of nice mushroom-headed concrete columns you get in early factories. And we thought these columns should help define the two exedrae and to be very present in an open plan foyer compressed between the two exedrae, kind of a forest of Delian columns supporting the weighty building above. And we'd also view this image by Constantine Hansen too, and enjoyed the strong side lighting and the boldly patterned floor. Volumetrically, the building was quite large. Volumetrically, the building was quite large. We wanted it to have a weighty quality, and the brief required very few windows, as the galleries would all be top lit or artificially lit. And so the exedrae helped us to break the volume down, and we used pedimented gables and window edicules to allow the building to address its 3 public sides at the smaller scale of the street. So these are just sketches showing the exedra in the volume and this sort of the street pavilion with these small pavilions, in this case facing the street, which help to break the building down. Here's the final design on the site, in the middle here, with the little car park access kiosk across the street. Here's a view of the approach to the entrance from the square with the kiosk on it. And the entrance exedra addresses the square opposite with its new kiosk and frames the existing trees at this point of the street, which we wanted to retain. So here's the kiosk, here's the exedra, and there's this line of existing trees. The landscaping on the entrance area spills across the street to gather the square and the kiosk into the composition. The park exedra up here allows the sculpture garden beyond to enter the territory of the art museum. The interior between these spaces is a dynamic and transparent space which allows a direct view from street to garden through the field of the dealing columns, compressing the space between the square and the park and drawing all 3 places, the park, the foyer and the square, into new public concourse for the city. The constantly shifting nature of these forms as one moves through the foyer gives a lightness which belies the mass of the building above. And to one side here are the education space and a cafe, and to the other, shop down here, the main staircase, 2 galleries, and a loading bay beyond, and there's a light well here in the middle. Here's a view of the foyer, with the park to the left and the street to the right, looking straight down towards the courtyard, and staircase in the distance on the left. You can see our dealing columns, a very shallow vaulted ceiling over the central aisle, and a floor in lino stolen from Aspland, who stole it from the Pantheon, of course. Here's a plan of the basement. So the courtyard extends down into the basement to light some of these. Sorry, keep losing the pointer. The courtyard extends into the basement to light some of these rooms. There's another gallery down here for sort of media installations which require darkness and loos, things like that. On the ground floor, the main staircase up here sweeps up into a poche space on the floor above. And the two poche spaces in the exedra provide space for the staircase, but on the other side, spaces for rest and sort of relief from the art, where you've got views out into the park, or over here, views out into the street. We're thinking a bit like those moments in Tate Modern where you can sort of press your face up against one of those really tall slit windows and look out across the Thames. Here's a view from one of the galleries into one of those rest spaces. And then on the second floor, the plan is basically repeated, with the exception that there's a double height space on the left here at the west end, with a view from this gallery looking over it. And this double height space was a requirement of the brief. In the sections, you can see the different ceiling heights of the various galleries, giving spaces which are the same in plan over 2 floors, different proportions. The galleries have simple but elegant coved ceilings echoing traditional galleries, while the poche spaces have exposed concrete beams and soffits. And you'll notice the section of the ground plane on the smaller section at the top of the page rises up towards the entrance through the foyer and then sinks back down again into the park. So the building volume as a whole is a composition in pale pinky red brick with a monumentality which allows it to sit happily amongst its more industrial and older neighbours. The corner pavilions allow the building to approach the streets at a scale more akin to the lower buildings across the street to the west, so that's slightly behind the view here. And a board-marked concrete frieze helps to express a base to the building, which grounds the volume while also sort of delineating the ground floor functions from the suite of galleries on the upper floors. The relatively abstract volume, its large expanses of beautiful blank brickwork with very few very large window openings, announce the building as a museum, an urban artifact, to quote Aldo Rossi. This is a building of real materials, stacked and poured in place. And the kiosk here is shown sort of in outline on the right. This is a view from the park. So urban space is not only a matter of quantity, but of quality, form and emphasis. Our proposal, hopefully, balances the monumental and the transparent, the artificial and the natural, by means of the familiar architectural forms of the enveloping exedre and the totemic columns. The garden exedra opens its arms to the park, while the entrance exedra invites visitors off the street and into the world of the museum. Finally, the curved forms and large windows facing the park echo those of the residential palace across the street. I hope you can see or agree that the armature of the classical order provoked and supported our spatial ideas, and perhaps how the translation of both grand canonical forms and motifs like the exedre, as well as the constructional traditions of the local building idioms, helped form the architectural nature of the proposed building.
Starting to wish we'd won some of these. So the design aim of this competition was to reinvigorate a historic town, part of a historic town, including a new naval museum, new facades to some existing buildings, and reorganizing the public realm of the area. It was in Santa Cruz de la Palma, in the capital of La Palma in the Canary Islands, and you must forgive my Spanish pronunciation in the next 7 or so minutes. This slide shows the general area of the competition, where the fine grain of the old town starts to break down against the more disparate, more modern parts to the north. And there's a large ravine that cuts through the site, running down towards the sea, straight through the middle of our site. There's also a busy coastal road, which cuts the town off from the beach and the sea. This slide shows the competition area, which encompasses a number of areas important to the cultural and religious life of the town, in addition to encompassing a number of urban problems. The area around E is close to the old Puerta Norte, which was a gateway into the town. At E itself on this plan are the remains of a fortification. At D are some existing traditional buildings, while F is low-quality recent storage sheds, and G an improvised car park, so very much the edgelands of this place. A is the Plaza San Fernando, a flattish grassy area. C is the Castle of the Virgin, an important point in the Bajada de las Nieves, a month-long festival which takes place every 5 years, celebrating the patron of the island. It includes a festival procession and the streets and squares of the town that host various religious and festive events. And when I mention the festival, that's the one I mean. B is the ravine splitting the site, which does occasionally flood with water from the mountains above. And the red circle indicates the existing naval museum that I really should have a picture of, but you can see it in plan here. It's a replica boat, a 15th century caravel boat, from which salvos are fired during the Bajada to Las Nieves. Unfortunately, we didn't get to visit the town, but the competition pack included some useful photos. And this is the Plaza San Francisco with what looks like a nice raised tank with a plant on a pedestal. And Casa Salazar. The competition was organised by the Spanish Cultural Foundation for Traditional Construction in collaboration with INTBAU and others, and supported by the Driehaus Foundation. So the use of traditional construction materials and techniques was central to the briefing. Buildings in central Santa Cruz tend to be 2 to 3 stories high, with interior courtyards, basalt stone or stone and lime rendered facades, and balconies, often in timber and often enclosed, as you can see here. Floors and roof structures are made from local pine, with pine floorboarding and roof sarking, and curved ceramic tiling on top. This is the ravine, which was to be covered over to provide a new town square and necessitated altered traffic flows. This is a view of the ravine meeting the sea, and a view of the existing housing to the north. You can see the mural or the figure painted on the left, which the brief asked us to deal with, to which we added a new facade with some housing and a cafe. This shows the area full of people during the festival, and that the ravine is really extremely inconvenient.
And the boat.
And the boat, indeed. The Getty Images bit is a digital afterthought. Actually, as a slight side note, for some of these, quite a few of these presentations, we're showing the actual boards of the competition. We thought that was quite interesting to see as part of the talk, that there are different constraints to how one is asked to present. So this is one of the 4 boards that we presented as part of this submission. We thought it interesting that the Urban Schema Museum would have to work for rare moments of the festival every 5 years and once in a lifetime visits by tourists, but also on a daily basis in this small town for local inhabitants. It's not a town, it seemed to us, that was large enough to sustain a tourist-only function that didn't have a day-to-day role. The quotidian and the exceptional, and architecturally, perhaps, the idealized and the realizable, the need for significant change at Plaza de San Fernando, and the augmentation of the built heritage of La Palma and the city's narrative. We sought a conversation in our designs between classical order and contemporary conditions. This map highlights the existing plazas and the route to the festival procession, the route the procession takes to its destination. Just chopped off to the bottom right is the new public space covering over the ravine. You can see that more clearly now we've zoomed out. Considered diagrammatically, our urban concept is very modest. The museum building defines the western edge. I hope you can see my cursor because it's behind all of your names. On the right-hand side here, there's a rerouting of the main road, the coastal road, into the town. Car parking is placed over the ravine here. And the Puerto Norte is reconstructed up here somewhere. Hard landscaping creates an edge to the water along here, and a new facade as built as housing up here to the north. But considered spatially and in the whole, we hope that the sum of these adjustments is coherent, practical, and a flexible series of quite powerful spaces. The new square terminates the streets to its south. It contributes to the Holy Week and Brigada to Las Nieves festivals as a celebratory participant, providing defined urban space and decorum for its finale and other annual events and gatherings. Here is the boat, here is the castle, here is our new building, and the space between on a shallow decline towards the sea.
And 11 was all new as well, wasn't it? That was all.
Yes, this is all
new landscaping with kiosks and things set into the retaining wall.
So the paved surfaces are level, defined by changes in module and texture rather than curbs and steps, forming a contiguous whole when the streets and car parking are closed for festivities. So the car parking, the intention was that would play a role in in the whole at important moments in time. It's one large, safe, people-friendly place. At other times, judicious planting and texture calms traffic and defines boundaries. Following the demolition of private seafront mansions in the 1950s, the museum represents a new mansion on the seafront, this time for the public. While defining the turn in the street from the south, it speaks to the boat museum across the new urban space, but it doesn't turn its back to the sea. Rather, a view and walkway is allowed through its internal courtyard, providing shelter from the elements in both summer and winter. The loggia and cafe face the sea, and the terraced public spaces stepping down to the north include seasonal amenities such as kiosks built into the retaining wall. And here is the sheet detailing the museum. Our aim for the design of the museum was to provide a few decorous and well-proportioned rooms for exhibition and public gathering, and for the layout to allow visiting researchers to study quietly while the citizens of the town go about their daily business of meeting for coffee, for the quotidian to exist happily with the exceptional. Accordingly, one large gallery room is situated on the ground floor, here number 16, beyond the reception desk, here number 3. And we imagine this in use as a temporary exhibition space due to its proximity to curatorial access and the citizenry who might visit each and every exhibition as part of their routine. An overall summary is that the entrance is through the centre of the west facade here into a covered passageway and the courtyard that we'll mention again in a moment. Reception and access to the stair and the first gallery are all left into a gift shop, education room, toilets, cafe, loggia overlooking the sea. A generous staircase, proportioned to encourage slow perambulation, leads to 3 further rooms of different sizes. You can see them here, 1, 2, 3. All with windows and balconies overlooking the square. We suggest these would be used as permanent exhibition spaces and a lecture theatre, and like to imagine fortunate guests of the town engaging with the festivities of the Bajada de las Nieves from the balconies in that central room here. Galleries are designed with a good balance of wall space for hanging artifacts and windows to provide daylighting and a visual connection to the town. We believe the spaces could be configured to allow for all sorts of curatorial approaches and a wide variety of artifacts. Towards the sea, over this side, are smaller rooms for education and learning, including a mezzanine library with study rooms beneath. Researchers can study the histories of François de Leclerc and Francis Drake while looking at the sea on which they sailed, or perch on a courtyard-facing interpretation along here of the intimate ventana con asiento, enclosed timber and glass balconies that are typical in the town on the mezzanine floor. The symmetry of the principal elevation enables this relatively modest civic building to anchor the whole urban design, but it's subordinated by the asymmetry of the building's plan, which gives the building a certain informality and sense of comfort. So you can see here, again, returning to the plan, that you enter on the centre, you arrive off axis into the courtyard here. In plan, that's off axis because we require more space on this side than we do on that side, but it also it results in this informality that sort of casualizes in a way the whole building into a loggia, which then moves you back on the axis to a symmetrical sea-facing facade. The central bay projects slightly, central 3 bays, and feature a stone flagpole base. Flags are common through our Google Street View research through the town and add a sense of a jolly sort of sense to the building. Top of the elevation batters back to evoke an entablature before terminating with a tiled a proto-cornice made from curved ceramic tiling in the manner of many local buildings, notably the Casa Salazar, which we showed earlier and really enjoyed. Those going about their daily business, meeting friends or family, or taking a break from study or classes may pass through the central passageway from the square into the sheltered courtyard, past the fountain inspired by the one in town with a large palm at its centre. From the passageway, the horizon over the sea can be seen. Through the courtyard and subsequent open loggia, a sequence inspired by Ragnar Osberg's Stockholm City Hall, shown blurrily here. And finally, beyond in the loggia and palm tree terrace, outdoor seating with, for the cafe facing the sea view. The museum would be constructed from load-bearing masonry and good thick walls in the materials and manner typical of La Palma. For the most part, externally, this would be lime rendered, both for budgetary reasons, but also to chime with the predominant finish of buildings in the town. However, as elsewhere locally, dressed basalt stone would be used for window surrounds, string courses, the main entrance front, and the few moments where the language of classical architecture is expressed. The mood of the public facing elevations is robust to suit its urban role and relatively exposed location, but welcoming with a string of mostly glazed arches at the ground floor with low sills. The inner courtyard utilises an arched Doric order in local basalt stone at ground floor. So we're in here now. And it has a giant Ionic order above, giving plenty of light and views across the space from the spaces within. Pilasters are finished in plaster with a stone minor order. Roof structures would be constructed, if possible, from local pine, with large section beams visible to the first floor interiors with wooden coffering. Flooring would again be local timber and stone, with proportions and laying patterns in accordance with the rooms they serve. All windows and doors are envisaged in traditional materials such as bronze or timber, with signage integrated into the transoms. The urban role of the new housing is to conceal a modernist housing apartment building to the north of the square, seen here, lurking just behind the museum. However, we don't see this as a mere matter of urban decorum, but also of a programmatic revitalisation and the opportunity to give the existing building a new face to the town. The building comprises 4 family-sized apartments on the upper floors with a small cafe or commercial space on the ground floor. The building has a generous ceiling height, and its garden seating area gives new life to the disused land and connects to the revitalised seafront. The building is constructed from load-bearing masonry with a tiled roof and timber window frames with architectural articulation in dressed stone. The flats benefit from access to multi-storied wooden balconies, a feature typical, as we've seen, of buildings in La Palma.
Just before we go on to the next project, some informal feedback we had from the competition was that the jury thought that our buildings looked very English. We thought they looked really Spanish. So it'd be interesting to know what everyone else thinks.
Should set up an interactive poll.
Yeah. So the final project we're going to talk about is a much smaller one for a woodland visitor centre in Surrey. And it sort of demonstrates perhaps a slightly freer approach of using order and the classical language. So the building was sited in a clearing in some woodland. And it's screened by a belt of trees from the car park, which also helps to make sure that the building is initially approached and seen only from the front, which you'll see is important in a minute. So this is a proposed building, and you sort of entered the site this way. We wanted our building to nestle into the woodland glade like a ceremonial encampment of tents. Should be festive and memorable. And we were thinking of this 1545 painting recording the meeting of Henry VIII of England and Francis I of France in 1520, the Field of the Cloth of Gold. And here are our proposed elevations, perhaps suggesting a small encampment with the building articulated as 2 tents pitched next to each other. So there's one large shingled volume on the left here, and one smaller sort of weatherboarded volume with a frilly copper roof. The plan is more ordered than the massing in the elevations. There's a roughly F-shaped rammed earth wall shown here in black, which frames the main spaces with rammed earth Tuscan columns, giving status to the most important rooms. So this is the entrance foyer with a sort of circular columns around here. This is all mostly service, sort of loos, a little kind of food kiosk, a kitchen, outdoor covered eating area, a store, the main exhibition space, and another outdoor covered seating area, which was also part of the brief.
And a lone rammed earth column at the top of the plan.
Oh, yes. Also, yeah. So this is the plan in more detail. So a fountain out the entrance with an upper bowl and a lower bowl for dogs to drink from. The loos, they needed quite a lot of them. The entrance foyer again, covered outdoor seating. Oh, sorry, this was a meeting room or a sort of education space. Kitchen, stroke kiosk, covered seating, picnic seating, store, and the main exhibition space. And this is a fireplace between the two rooms. Section again going from the fountain through the foyer into the main space. The foyer is top lit, sort of through a kind of a ley light, which allows us to bring the light into the center of the room. And our sort of perennial favorite motif, these billowing ceilings. This is a close-up of the entrance, and again, it's competition. I think I don't think I would do this in this way again. I think I would change some of these things. I think it's this sort of pier needs a capital, maybe some entasis, and I think it would be much better if this entablature was received onto at least a pilaster or perhaps even a vestigial capital or something. But anyway, this is the nature of competition. So you do things quickly.
That roof
and
junction
have to go with
doesn't work.
So the lobby space is apsidal in shape, top lit, and the rammed earth is expressed. So it provides a robust space for gathering out of the weather, and with a log fire for cold days and plenty of wall space for dedications for sponsors and things on the right here. In the main hall, the exhibition space is a tall, bright and festive space for exhibitions, meetings and all sorts of other gatherings. The spine wall to the right provides hanging space, and large glazed openings between the piers connect the room to the woodland setting. And the ceiling, yes, is so as I've said, favourite, but it's obviously inspired by Schinkel at the Charlottenhof Palace tent room. It's a very favourite building of ours. And here's the final encampment in its forest glade. And I think that's all we've got for you. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. Very interesting indeed. And now we will start the question and answer session. And we have a question from Douglas. Douglas, can you please unmute your microphone?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
and ask
indeed.
your question.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting talk. Thank you. What I'd like to ask is the architectural competition. It's very like a student project in many ways. It's a kind of vehicle for expression. It's an experimentation, but it's also about learning and validation as well. Do you see any relationships between the two, between your architectural teaching and your competition and practice?
You want to say?
Yes. Yeah, it's I mean, in very general terms, our practice informs our teaching, and our teaching informs our practice in very useful ways. the teaching year, albeit a year long, is far quicker than most project timescales. But the competition, yeah, it's really helpful. It's very, very quick. And although we have some increasingly more experience than our students, it's useful to be able to let them know just how quickly things have happened, that we can relate to them. We might do a competition over, say, 3 weeks. The first week is absorbing the brief, having a little think about it, probably having a chat about it and a scribble in the sketchbook in a pub. The second week is really ought to be getting on with this. And towards the end of the second week, you start getting on with it. And that the weekend of the second week is all competition. And then the final week is when we've had all the good ideas and we think, do we really have to do this? And I always conclude we may as well, but I try to make the best case I can for bailing out there and then. But then it's the rush to the end, just like the students have. It's on your own shoulders, your own few shoulders. You can't blame the client for not getting back to you. You can't blame the engineer for not sending you the drawings. You just have to get it done. So it does help us to sympathise with students. And also, there's an example there of what they're going through being related to at least our version of the professional world.
I think it's also true that the sort of the conciseness of the format is also a bit like a student project, in that you have to try and communicate the whole idea and the whole, hopefully, richness and complexity of your building in a very abbreviated format. So that's, yeah, I think it's a good analogy.
And when we were students, we Gordon Benson of Benson Forsyth lectured to us, who did the New Museum of Scotland. Quite a forceful character, and it made quite an impression. But the thing that really stuck with, I think, both of us, certainly me, was he said, look, the competition, you've just got to decide on the sections that are useful, the images that you're going to present right at the beginning. And this is really useful for students, around Easter time or interim crit. What is going to comprise the portfolio? Make them work. Obviously, you don't want obvious discrepancies, but this isn't getting built until you win it and get commission. So you make it sing. You decide on those few drawings and images, you make them sing, and you make every one of them communicate your ideas as directly as possible. They're flicking through hundreds of in an international open competition. There are literally hundreds. Say this as a very unsuccessful practice in winning competition, but still, I think that's true.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much. It's good to see that relationship between what you do in your competitions, and there's what seems to be a close relationship between your teaching practice and your competition practice. Thank you for that. Very interesting.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. The next question is from John Bush. I don't know how to pronounce it. Can you unmute your microphone and ask for it?
Yes, can you hear me all?
I can hear you, I can see you.
Well, here I am again. Nice to see you. So in a little screen. It's beautiful work. Yeah. But I'm very interested because I was very impressed about you telling. You're good storytellers as well. You make a good story, and it's first design the story and then the building. Can you tell more about, because there's a lot of ideas and a lot of let's say, I don't know exactly how to ask it, but can you tell me more about the beginning? Because when I've reflected to my own designs, it's always a big explosion of ideas, blah, 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 and then I have to focus on one thing. How do you do that? And especially with the two of you, because it's also not so easy. It could be easy, but Yeah.
I think I suppose there's two questions there, isn't it? One is how do we work together, and the other one is about the sort of initial ideas for the competition. And I suppose, we always try and find again, a little bit in the way that we try and hope that students will find the one thing, the one image, the one idea that's driving the project, and that is the thing that you sort of have to preserve at all costs until you can't preserve it anymore. Then you have to let it go sometimes. But I suppose just an example, and also it has to be a clear idea, and it has to be, so that you can understand it, and everyone who's working in the competition, because obviously we don't just do them all ourselves, everyone in the competition needs to understand it. And so it's got to be, and hopefully the jury can understand it, so it's got to be kind of quite direct and graspable, although I think it can be supported by sort of sub ideas, for want of a more poetic phrase. So for instance, on the competition that I just talked about, the last one, the Langley Vale one, the main idea was, we were asked, we had to build this woodland, this visitor centre, which I think had a certain square footage attached to it, and it obviously had to be in this forest glade. And so then you as you say, you've got thousands of potential ways of working out that requirement. And so we thought, well, actually, sort of mushed all together, it's going to be quite a big building in this sort of delicate environment. So we thought, okay, well, maybe it needed to be split. And then so thinking about separate buildings in a forest glade, and then one of us thought of the that painting, the Field of the Cloth of Gold, just as an illustration of loads of tents in a field. And so that was the main thing which prompted sort of the massing and the expression, the sort of tent-like forms. And then of course it's just precedent. So we love leverance, so there's lots of leverance in that building. We're aware of construction methods like rammed earth, so that got chucked in.
It was for the Woodland Trust. We love the Woodland Cemetery. I mean, it's pretty direct, but there are ideas there about how to make quite buildings that combine gravity with humour, that are weighty enough to locate themselves as modest buildings in this huge and very impressive landscape. So why wouldn't you be looking at it?
Because the first one isn't built, because it's beautiful. I thought it was beautiful with all the tiles.
Thank you. It was going to get planning permission, and then they just withdrew it. It was, to my mind, crazy.
Yes, it was beautiful. Well, thank you very much, guys. Liked it. Okay.
Actually, I suppose one very briefly, one thing we didn't answer was how we work together, and I think the answer is sort of we are good at different things, but we can also take over quite seamlessly when one or other of us has finished the thing that they're good at. We can then hand it over to the other one who will take it over. And we also find in projects that inevitably one of us cares a little bit less than the other one about one or other part of it. So there's a good deal of tolerance involved as well.
Very good
relationship.
Thank you very much for the answers.
It was really nice to see you, John.
Thanks for coming, John.
Yes. Okay, bye-bye.
We have then two questions quite similar in between them, like how do you analyze which competition you are going to enter? So I will invite Axel to unmute and ask, because his question is quite similar. How to choose which one to do? Axel?
Okay, well, that's fine. Yeah, I see Andrew Petherick here has asked that question, and my question was sort of a variant of that. I'm curious whether you ever find that there's a connection between the projects that you're most excited to enter in advance of entering the competition and really starting the work, and which competition that in hindsight you're very happy that you have entered. Those might be very different competitions, and I presume it could be that you go very excited into one of them and you sort of leave halfway through, or you're not too happy with it, and then there might be one that you're very doubtful about should we go in and do this work? But then it turns out it's a great challenge, and you really get to tweak and refine your design. It would just be exciting to hear if any of those particular projects we looked at today has been one of those, or if there are any others that has been particularly helpful to you as a practice or as architects.
Good question.
I was saying
Thank you.
the main commonality is that a competition has come along, and they don't very often.
Well,
Increasing
an open competition.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Mm.
So increasingly competitions, I think 20, 25 years ago, there would have been far more open competitions in this country that might have led to a building being built. So thinking about Millennium projects, and we've seen all the competition boards at the Walsall Art Gallery, for example, on a field trip there, from probably 94, 95, when Caruso Ingen, Fretton, Surgeon Bates and all those guys were young and applying for stuff. They were actually open. I can't remember if there's a second round or not, or whether they simply appointed the winner, it got built. And you look back to the 70s or something, and you've got tutors at Kingston School of Art, 25 years old, Powell and Moyer, winning Churchill Gardens in Pimlico, 1,500 units or something like that. And they were just teamed up with Arup to make sure no mistakes got made. So it's very different now. There aren't many to take part in. So that's the main thing. Is there a competition to do? Secondly, do we think we've got anywhere near enough time to do it? And then it's, do we want to do it? And that, yeah, by then, some of it is kind of have to, because there's not many of them. And they all have different qualities, but I would say in reflection on all of them, they've been worth it. It's worth that last week of pain, because we're having fun. You know, there's no one constraining what we do. It feels like being a student again, and they can fill a whole lecture. I mean, not this one specifically, but when we're invited to talk about our ideas and about how we go about our practice, no one wants to see 15 kitchen extensions, do they? This is where, you know, it's our portfolio, and it's wherever we are, competitions are really important in having got us here.
And there are some where I think there have only been a very few that we've started and then just stopped because we think we just don't have time, or you know, or maybe an actual job has come along and so we thought, well, that's better. But yeah, one or two we have dropped because we just thought, you know, sometimes the sort of complexity and the arduousness of the submission is not apparent until you've worked a little way into the competition. And sometimes we think there's just no point in, you know, you do some of the initial sketches, you start looking at the site plan, you read, you know, and you realize that this is just a waste. It's a waste of time. And often it's those projects where the accompanying submissions, it's not just the design, but you know, you've got to write literally hundreds of pages of supporting information, and you know, we know we're not going to win it anyway. So so you know, at that point you think, well, there's no point working every night for the next 2 weeks just to type out a Word document of extremely tedious stuff about your health and safety policy in the office, you know, how many staplers you buy and that sort of stuff. You know, it's like
but when we have done that, so there's another species of competition, we didn't show any of them here, which was housing. And very early in the practice, we did the Peabody 150th anniversary of Peabody. They did a competition for a site in Newham, Plaistow Hospital, and we were shortlisted and exhibited alongside 18 or 19 others, including May, who were, you know, we were friendly with at the time, who just won the Sterling Prize. And we thought, yeah, okay, someone else sees that enjoying the legacy of Peabody and being traditionally minded modern architects, we might have something to say here. And so we did another Peabody competition, didn't get anywhere, and then we started entering for frameworks and, you know, any housing competition that came along. We didn't get anywhere, but we got on the Southwark framework in collaboration with very good modern traditional architect in Holland, Hans van der Heyden. And we went. So we were thrilled to have got involved. And sorry, amusingly, pizza's just arrived, and they won't leave it with us without being given a code, which is on my phone. So you will forgive me. Oh,
yeah. But I suppose it's hard to say which competitions have been more useful to us. I think they've all clarified a particular bit of thinking, but I don't think there's. I mean, and also you forget them. So actually, it was really nice looking back at the Palmer competition today that Tim described to you. I thought, actually, there's some really nice stuff in here. I'm quite pleased with that, but I'd completely forgotten about it. But yeah, I think maybe some of that stuff will come out in a project one day. But yeah, it's hard to say specifically which ones have been really useful. I think if we built one, that would be the one that would be really useful.
The thought struck me as well when I saw these sort of pot-ready projects ready to go with so many clever details in it, that I started thinking, how often do you sort of revisit a competition you've done months or years ago, or even with that great bank of things that you've thought through, detailing, clever little things? How often do you sort of find them again, or go through and pick them up and rework them slightly and find, oh, we got somewhere we could apply that detail from that project that never got built? Is that something you come across often?
It's interesting that, because as you started asking it, I was thinking, well, never, because we haven't done an art gallery. But the Delian columns, we're about to build one single one in the centre of an extension, a house we're doing some work on in Camden. It also has shallow concrete vaults. So I think there's nothing wrong at all with finding things that are meaningful for the way you practice. And we've not yet had the chance to do any of these things lots of times. But the tented ceilings, for example, we've done them once at the house we finished a couple of years ago that got the TAG award last year. I'm sure it will continue appearing. Every project has a very particular set of circumstances. So certainly I think those things come from the thinking that competitions afford you. And they're in there.
Andrew, do you think your question was answered as well? I hope so. Andrea, do you have any question?
Hi.
Hi.
So good to see you both. I don't really have any questions. I just want to say that just listening made me a bit nostalgic about tutorials. It was really, really nice to hear you both and be on the other side rather than presenting, be the one listening to.
You're not nostalgic about the deadlines, though.
No, the deadlines, no, in no way about the deadlines. But I do want to ask, in terms of the paintings that you showed, which were really well associated with your proposals, like, do you have an archive, or how do they just come to mind when you make a proposal, or how do they come about? Because there are quite a few of them and they were really spot on.
Well, I mean, it's a mixture of things. Sometimes, we're definitely not art historians, so sometimes you have a painting in the back of your mind, you don't know what it's called, so then you end up doing a lot of Googling to find out who it was. Sometimes you do just know the artist, and we've got, we do have books on artists, and we collect, not specifically as a collection, but we both, whenever we go to a museum, we'll buy postcards of the paintings that we really like, and so they are usually around in the office in piles, so sometimes you flick through a big stack of postcards. But yeah, I mean, I suppose it's general love of mostly figurative art, I guess. Although we do have some books on more abstract painters as well,
and mostly art's got buildings in.
Yes, yes, that's true. Yeah, we love a painting of a building.
yeah. Amazing.
I really like portraits of sort old monks and stuff from from the 15th, 16th centuries too, but they don't tend to inform the buildings very much.
Maybe you
We're
can.
getting quite old as well now, Andrea. So we've seen quite a lot of exhibitions.
Yes.
Well, I did. You said it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have myself a question for you. Do you think that your approach is aligned somehow with what Andres Zuoni named the fifth recall to order? Are you familiar with this, with his recalls to order?
I don't think I am. I mean, I'm
So
familiar with
it's
him,
very
but not that.
interesting because somehow overlaps very nicely with your work. Andre Duani, which is an architect and planner, introduced the notion of recall to order in his book Heterodoxia Architectonica in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that after periods of architectural dissipation, there have been by now 4 recalls to order in which the classicists made a sort of call to order in face of disorder. And the first one was in the Renaissance, and it was followed by a lot of treatises and all sorts of instruction how to implement it. And the last one is the actual one in which we are living, the 20th century one, but which, although introduced contemporary architecture revival, didn't really manage to fight and restrain modernism. And now he's calling for a fifth one, a fifth recall to order, which is directed more to the youth. And he thinks that they need a mission more ambitious than polishing the pillars of past classicism. Practically what you are doing. Because his theory is that although he is absolutely convinced that classicism has the recipe and is the order container, still contemporary architecture has some qualities and manage somehow to steal all the attention and the investment and the whatever. And traditional architecture should learn from that. So to take the positive parts of it and incorporate, giving again the order, but not totally dismissing what the modern architecture can bring, the little good things, pieces. So to ask you again, do you think you are part of this fifth recall to order? Can you be considered one of the one who are
Depends whether you have.
implementing them?
It depends whether it's about your interests and ambitions or about what you're achieving in the built environment, I suppose.
It's not about ambitions, it's about a way of restoring order with different means, with a more adapted means, or how to say, adapted. That's probably a good term.
I think I broadly agree, and we're excited by certainly what attracted me to architecture as opposed to art and design was its constraint, and then as I got older, realizing part of that constraint, it wasn't just a brief, I'd rather be a problem solver than have to generate my own artistic practice, for example. But that there was a big attraction of what we call for a long time, or it was insisted for a long time, we were only interested in classical architecture, much more increasingly comfortable with traditional architecture, was the sense that it's all bigger and more long lasting than us. And that's a really exciting potential rather than an irritating constraint. And when you see supposedly more exciting buildings go up and date terribly quickly, then that feels more and more important. Don't know if that's an answer, it just occurred to me as you're speaking. And the new urbanism thing, we couldn't really get along with any of that or find much interest in it until we started going to the States a bit more often, and then realized why American architects in particular are so excited about it. Coming from the European city, slightly baffling amount of energy spent on it. Don't know. I mean, Also, after one of these competitions, the one organised by the Architecture Foundation, Alice Woodman's the director of that, and kindly met with each of the participants and gave them some feedback. And actually, that was very nice too. We ended up having lunch with Jeremy Dixon after he'd been in the jury and said some nice things. So, you know, it's sort of opened some doors to interesting conversations. Alice suggested that as architects interested in what we were interested in, we'd not got much chance in these competitions. He said, "Can you imagine the very self-consciously modern board of trustees of an art gallery employing someone like you, saying the things that you're saying, and showing columns and arches and things like that?" So, probably right. Not really, not at the moment. As usual, architecture's far ahead of boards of trustees at modern museums.
Yeah, I'm not sure we've quite answered the question, but I think it's a provocative one.
Yes, anyway, there must be a beginning of everything.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we should have to read the book.
So, any other questions? If there aren't any other questions, I would like to tell you that this is the last talk of 2023. We will wrap up for the moment, but we
Merry
are
Christmas.
waiting. Sorry.
Merry Christmas.
Until the Christmas, we have the TAG Award ceremony, and you are all invited. Of course, you have to book a ticket, the one which haven't done yet. And I would like also to announce the next talk, which is in January 18, where we will have Julian Bignall in conversation with George Saumarez-Smith, and they will discuss the work of Bernardo Vitone, the architect of the transcendent. I hope you enjoyed this talk. Oh, I did very much, and I wish to see you to the next talk, and everybody a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.